Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's workshop. We're just going to take a moment or so to have people continue to log on and join the meeting. We have a good number registered to attend tonight, so we really hope that they will all be joining us. So we're just going to give another minute or so before we get started. Okay, well, we have a good number logged on, and we can have people join us as they come along. We want to honor your time, and we really appreciate you being on time. So let's get started.
Thank you, Joan, and welcome everyone to our online virtual workshop for the Housing Element Update. And I want to take a moment to welcome everyone back who has been participating since November and in January and then recently in May. And here we are already at our 4th community workshop to continue our discussion. And before we get started with today's agenda, I would like to pause for just a moment to welcome our mayor of the city of San Carlos, Laura Parma-Lohan, and she would like to say a few opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Yes.
All right. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. I'm Laura Parma-Lohan, mayor of the city of San Carlos. And you'll see I'm in a car, but I'm not driving. I'm a passenger. And the car is fully stopped. And you can see the driver station is unoccupied. So everybody's safe and sound here. But I wanted to see, okay. Everything's fine, except I have an inability apparently to be able to hold the phone. So in any event, all right, am I coming through okay?
You are now.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, if you hold the phone steady, no video,
can you hear
you'll
me?
be great. Yes.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. Okay, sorry about that. Just got a shot of the vehicle. But anyway, the housing discussion is something that's very near and dear to my heart and so important to us as a community. And I really appreciate you all weighing in on what matters to you as we embark on updating our housing element. As Lisa mentioned, this is the 4th workshop in the San Carlos Housing Element Update. And with limited choices for housing across a range of prices, we face an unprecedented challenge to ensure that housing is available and inclusive to people of all incomes. At the last workshop in May, we saw how much more housing was possible along portions of Laurel Street if zoning rules were adjusted. At tonight's workshop, we're going to see what is possible to achieve along El Camino Real and other high density multifamily zones in San Carlos. We know we have to plan for more housing, not just in San Carlos, but across the Bay area region at large. And San Carlos portion is no less than 2,735 new homes. As we collaborate to find solutions, we will discover the right fit and mix of housing types for our community. And if cities across California continue to fall short of housing, our state legislators will continue to draft housing bills to address the shortfall and essentially choose for us. And I know I've heard from many of you that you don't want that you want to be able to create the community that you want to be a part of. And tonight is an opportunity for us to weigh in on what that looks like. So thank you very much for participating in this. I really appreciate it. And between now and the next one, I'm going to be working on my camera skills and Zoom operation ability. So thank you for your patience and have a great discussion this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on with our workshop. Again, my name is Lisa Porras, Planning Manager for the City of San Carlos and Project Manager for this particular project. On tonight's agenda, we're going to be presenting a brief recap of the housing element for anyone new that might be joining us. And this will be just a brief recap. We want to be able to get everyone on the same page and talk about the process that goes along with updating this particular housing policy document for our city. We're also going to learn together about the potential changes that can help the city of San Carlos achieve its housing needs, or what we call in the profession our Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. You'll see that acronym quite a bit. And again, our number in San Carlos is 2,735 new homes. And we also want to hear from you. And we're hoping that you will participate in this very important discussion and provide us with feedback on possible zoning solutions that we can look at along El Camino Real and in other multifamily housing areas in the city of San Carlos. So tonight's project team that is joining you this evening is, again, myself, Lisa Porras, our Community Development Director, Al Sabay, and Aaron Acknan, our Strategic Advisor. And then on the consultant side tonight from MIG Consulting Group, we have Lisa Brownfield, Project Manager, and also Joan Chaplet, who will be serving as our lead facilitator for tonight's meeting. And then finally, before I turn it over to Joan, just a couple of housekeeping items. I think most of you may know this, but in case those that don't, we have a project website, which is sancarlos2040.org. A lot of information about this project, including recordings of this meeting, will be posted on the project website, as well as meeting summary documents. And even we even have a repository of recordings from previous workshops. So all of this is available to you on the website. And it's also a place where you can submit additional comments anytime throughout the duration of this project. So after this evening, if there's anything else that you would like to add, feel free, and please do go to the project website and provide us with any additional comments that you may have. And then lastly, you can also sign up. That way you don't miss anything, any workshops, any study sessions that we have along the way. We are going to be presenting the project timeline, just a reminder of where we're at in this process, but we're going to be continuing doing this work throughout the remainder of this year and all of 2022 as well. So just to kind of give you a heads up, it's not too late to sign up, and we hope you do if you haven't yet. So with that, I think the next slide is for Joan to kick us off. So thanks again. Well, thank you, Joan.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So there's a number of ways that you'll be able to participate in tonight's workshop. As we have in the previous meetings, we're going to be using Zoom polling. We'll also be taking questions and comments. So if you want to send them in through the chat. We have the opportunity for verbal comments. So you can either raise your hand, there's the raise hand feature, or you can send a comment in through the chat that you'd like to make a verbal comment. And then we want to make sure that we have our regular formal comment period at the end of the meeting, and anyone seeking to speak will have up to 2 minutes then. So just a reminder of where the chat features are. So just type that in. We have 2 folks behind the scenes who are taking notes on a digital whiteboard. We'll share them periodically so you can see what's coming in. And then we also have the raise hand feature. And when you raise that hand, we get a signal here. Our behind the scenes team will be able to stop. And as the facilitator, I'll call on people periodically as time permits, depending on where we are in the agenda. So we're going to get started right out of the gate with some polling questions. And we have 3 questions. We have been asking these at every meeting so that we can get a sense of who's participating. Do we have the same people? Is it changing? So I'm going to ask my colleague Jesse to open the polls and ask you to participate in our first polling question. So please tell us how long you've lived in San Carlos. Less than a year, 1 to 4 years, 5 to 9 years, or more than 10 years. So when we have just about everyone weighing in, I'll give it another minute to give you a chance to get familiar with the Zoom poll, but we'll keep moving through these quickly. So Jesse, let's share the results. And it looks like we have the bulk of our participants have been in town for more than 10 years, but we also have a few newcomers as well. So this is good. We continue to get variety in our participation. Let's go to the next polling question. So now we'd like to know about your housing situation. So do you own your home, rent your home, live with family and friends, or do you not currently have a permanent home? So Jesse, if we could have the next polling question. And again, it really helps us understand the perspectives we're getting if they're coming from homeowners or renters or other housing situations. Okay, so we have a significant group of homeowners on the line. Jesse, why don't you share the results? So more than 80% homeowners, but we do have some renters represented, and also a participant who falls into our third category here. Okay, let's go on to our next question. And now the age question. So again, this is anonymous, but it helps us see how our outreach is going and what the age group of our members are represented here on the phone. Okay, so folks are quickly answering that question. And we have heard from just about everyone. We have a few holdouts who don't want to share their age. So Jesse, let's close the poll and share just the age distribution here. So we're getting some from the younger set, and then also some folks who have along with living here 10 years are in their 50s and 60s. So we have some good age distribution in the meeting. So thank you for that information. And again, that helps us see how we are doing in terms of our outreach. So those are the poll results for our 3 questions. And with that, we're going to move on to the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce Lisa Brownfield. She's from MIG and she is the project manager for this effort. Lisa?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the meeting tonight. We've been seeing through the chat, there's a couple of people asking about how many people are participating. So before I start, we know we have about 29 people or 30 people or so who are coming in through a computer link. We also have a handful of people who are calling by who are in by telephone. So roughly 30 to 40 is a good guess of where we are tonight. So and that number may change, as we go through the course of the evening. That's just how Zoom workshops go. So let's start with the presentation. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about what a housing element update is. The housing element update is, we update the housing element every 8 years. And as you can see on this slide, the current housing element covers the period between 2015 to 2023. And the last cycle that we had to plan for 596 homes. This next cycle, which is called the 6th cycle, is going to be 2023 to 2031. And you can see here that we're also going to be planning for at least 2,735 new homes. So there's a significant change and a significant jump, which is why the city is having to look at other options for housing in the future. Next slide, please. The housing element is a little bit unusual in the sense that it has a special legislative intent. And as I said before, we have it's an 8-year cycle. The update is from 2023 to 2031, but it must be adopted by January 31st, 2023. So that's our target. Also, housing elements, as Lisa spoke about it before, we need to demonstrate the city has the ability to allow for approximately 28 new homes in the next 8 years, and that's the RENA. So that's also part of the legislative intent, that we have to prove that. Next.
And Lisa, could you repeat the number of homes? I think you may have misspoken. So you said 28, and I know it's bigger than that. So just to remind people.
Yes, I'm sorry. We have flip to the previous slide, and we'll take a show here. You hear this slide is also saying that 2735, which is the number that we have to speak to in the minimum, but we've also included a buffer, and we'll talk a little bit about that, Jen, and that's probably why I think you heard a little bit of a discrepancy. So we'll get to that next in another minute. So what we've heard, this is what we've heard from you before. Lisa mentioned that we're on our 4th workshop, and we are. And as you can see here, we've learned a number of different things from the community over the time. We've kind of learned like what's important to you. We've also had ideas about where is appropriate to have new housing, and not only specific locations. We've also had the types of characteristics that are important to you. For example, the community said additional housing near transit or additional housing near goods and services is more of a priority than having housing in other areas. So all of those things we're learning information as we go all the way through the process, and we're continuing to apply it as we go along. Next slide, please. Keep next again, please. So one of the things that we've known from the past is that we've had rules in the past, like we have rules now with the zoning now. And this is an image of the Trestle apartment. And this is what was able to be accomplished up to about now. And this is pretty typical of what more recent San Carlos development. It's approximately 200 units, it's 3 stories, there's surface parking. Interesting to note, though, that when it was originally proposed, it was originally proposed as 4 stories and 280 units. So through the development process and through the approval process, it went from a larger development project down to one which was actually constructed. Next slide.
Okay, and there's a couple of questions coming in through the chat, and I'll stop periodically and get them answered. But Lisa, why don't you keep going, and then we'll come to a stopping place.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves through the process, are the current zoning regulations really working? And as we showed from the picture before, yes, it is. Recently, we've seen some mixed use development and multifamily zoning. The majority of them have been condominiums and larger units. However, we're also finding that any of the proposals are not reaching their full development potential, nor are they meeting the below market rate or BMR RENA. And the RENA is the number that's essentially assigned to the city. So while you're getting new development, it is not being produced at the level at which the city had originally anticipated. And so we need to look and think about all of that. As part of this process, we've also then talked to developers and had both for-profit and nonprofit developers, and done some comparisons with other cities about what is making development occur, not only just in the community in general, but it's also what is making things occur that are more in tune with where their cities want to go. And what we've heard from the reviews that we've done and the comparisons that we've done, that it really focuses on height, density, and some other modified regulations. So we've taken that information, plus what we've observed through the case studies that have been done in the city so far, and we're coming up with ideas about looking at and thinking about height and density and some of the other modifications. Next slide, please.
Okay, and Lisa, before you get too far, this question is for Lisa Porras. There's a question about this. Did the city apply for or request an exemption or an adjustment to the state numbers given our limited footprint availability and transportation infrastructure?
No, San Carlos did not object to the RENA allocation that it was given. I think there were only a couple cities in San Mateo County that had some questions about their allocation early in the process. And there were some adjustments made to those, but San Carlos did not object or submit a letter regarding its allocation.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And Lisa Brownfield, we have a question about which cities were talked to. Do you have that information at hand?
We did it a number of months ago, but I can tell you a few of them off the top of my head because they had unusual or unique responses. We talked to cities, San Luis Obispo. We talked to San Mateo. We talked to other Bay Area cities, Oakland, and some other peninsula cities as well. And then we even went as far as talking to places like in Oregon, Lake Oswego, Oregon, because they've been having some really interesting changes that are going on, as well as even in Denver. So overall we talked about 12 to 15 different jurisdictions through mostly in California, most of them Northern California, but we did pick up a couple of other ones as well when we heard through the heard through the community that they're doing some interesting work.
Okay, and then Lisa P., this is a follow-up to your response about the, can we object to the reallocation or is it too late?
It is too late. The appeal process, I think the deadline to submit a letter, and if my colleagues can, I'm pretty sure it has closed at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But if any of my colleagues know, feel free to jump in. But
correct. I'll note two things. It did pass, and actually no cities in San Mateo County appealed there. So there was some discussion earlier on about a year ago. I believe there were some adjustments made to Brisbane, but other than that, there were no major adjustments made, and no city within San Mateo County appealed. The chances of winning appeal are very low, and it most likely will not occur for any of the cities that appealed, and most of those are in the East Bay or in the North Bay.
Okay, great, thank you. So Lisa B., I'm going to turn it back to you, and maybe you can get back in the flow of your presentation. I didn't want to get too far behind on the questions.
That's fine, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, we talked a little bit about the numbers a few minutes ago. So as we said before, the RENA is 2,735. And then generally, most jurisdictions look at having a buffer. And in this case, for the city of San Carlos, it seems to be a reasonable 20% buffer is reasonable. And so that's an additional 547 units. Therefore, our overall target that we're really aiming for is 3,282. So we're going to be looking at trying to find sites and places for approximately 3,200 units. And as we go through this process. Next slide. Okay. First, we want to have some things that we need you guys to think about as we move through this. First of all, recognize that the city is required by state law to determine how it's going to meet the RENA, or in this case, accommodate the 3,282 new homes. This is not an option for the city to say yes or no. That isn't a discussion point. The city needs to do that. We also need us to consider adjustments along El Camino, and we're going to be looking at 2 different case studies at this point. And we're exploring opportunities to apply some of these ideas to other mixed use areas and higher density zoning areas as well. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go through. In the process, we're going to ask you to review the visualizations and diagrams to help you inform some of your thoughts and your comments. And then we're going to be asking you to help the city gauge and understand the level of support for some of these options. So that's kind of like our request of you at this point, is to think about these things as we're moving through in the presentation. Go ahead. So when we started to do the work, we first looked at what are the existing rules, or what does the existing zoning allow you to do, and how many units can we achieve just without changing anything. And then we went through and said, okay, we're not going to be able to meet the RENA at this point. So we started looking at other factors that might influence the unit count, so to speak. And we looked at dwelling units, height, parking, as well as the open space. And as you can see here, dwelling units and height really play a large role into that. And so we focused on that as we went through the rest of the scenario processing and the analysis, and you'll be seeing that as we move on as well.
Okay. And Lisa, before you go on to
Uh-huh.
this, there was a question, do ADUs count in the RENA numbers?
Yes, ADUs will count. So there is a methodology for determining how many units. So you start with we'll start with the 3,300 as our target. Any of the planning projects that are in the pipeline, so to speak, you'll be able to subtract those. ADU estimates, we're going to be able to subtract those. So we're trying to winnow down, we'll go through a process where we're winnowing down that 3,200 units to another amount. And that other amount is the one, what we're trying to do to, at this point is, that other amount is the ones that we have to solve for and find the locations for. So there, we can talk a little bit more about that process at some other point, but there is a process and ADUs do count. Okay, so we're talking about El Camino Real zoning. Zoning, just for anybody who doesn't know, zoning designates how a property can be used. It identifies the types of land use that can be there. It talks about how dense or how intense something can be. It lays out the parking rules, lays out open space, heights, and a whole series of other design characteristics and standards. The zoning for the El Camino predominantly is MUNB, which is a North Boulevard, MUSB, South Boulevard, and MUD, which is mixed use downtown. Right now, the zoning on El Camino, the uses allowed are retail, commercial, hotels, and residential. So all of those uses are able to be built right now. Pretty consistently along El Camino is the density is 50 DUs per acre, as well as 50 feet in height or 4-story maximum. Okay, next slide, please. As you can see here, in the area, who has the pointer can kind of run the pointer along. Actually going to have you run it along the map, and you're going to along where El Camino is, where you can see it's a series of brown kind of colors in there. That's the areas that we're really talking about. It's the mixed use low density, which is 10 to 20, mixed use medium density, 21 to 50. And so that's predominantly what's, that's general plan designations, but that's kind of the areas that we're talking about tonight, is that area. Next slide. In our analysis for tonight, we have essentially 2 different scenarios that we'll be looking at. For each one of the scenarios or sites, we're going to have 3 different options. One is existing zoning. So we're going to be saying, based on the rules, current rules, this is what can be developed. Then you're going to have scenario A, which is increasing height to 75 feet or 6 stories, and scenario B, increasing height to 90 feet or 8 stories. And once you're in each one of these scenarios, as you're going to see, as we go through, there are 2 kind of variations. One looks at parking at existing zoning requirement, and then also looking at parking when you have a parking reduction, which is allowed by state law. It's important to note, though, on the state law that we're looking at here is kind of at the outside edge. It is it's a pretty significant reduction, and it can only be applied to in special cases. For example, the site would have to be within a half a mile of a transit stop or a major, a train station or a major bus stop. It also has some criteria for about the number of low-income units that are being provided. But we decided to use this level because it then kind of shows you the 2 ends of the spectrum about parking. What if you develop to the current zone, and then what if there's the reduction all the way down to a significant reduction? So most of the development projects are going to be coming in somewhere in between that. So next slide. One of the things that we want to talk to you about before we, or show you before we get into the analysis, is that San Carlos has a really high level of architecture and design in its projects. And what we're going to be showing you tonight is all about illustrating height and massing. And so when you see our examples tonight, they're kind of boxy, they don't have a lot of design, and that's intentional because we don't want to have a distraction about architecture. We really want to talk about height and massing. So before we get into that, and to just kind of show you some of the types of architecture that have been occurring, to lay any of your fears, saying that the new things that are going to be coming along are not going to look like our massing examples. They're going to be more looking at like what you already have in your city. And so with that, let's go ahead and flip to those examples, please. Here's the 15, I'm sorry, you want to stop?
So there's a comment in the chat about questions. So we'll get through this and we'll stop for questions. I've asked for some of the clarifying comments along the way. And then I think later, Lisa Porras, there are a few questions about what more about the characteristics these developments would require. And so we'll have the city speak to that a little bit, but let's get through our main question tonight, which is staying focused on the El Camino area and introducing this conversation here. So okay. Lisa, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So for some of the examples of architecture that have been developed recently or in the process, is you have the 1501 San Carlos Avenue example. Then you have the Wheeler Plaza. And here's another example, and you can see here the level of architecture and refinement is very high on both of those projects. Next one. Example of 560 El Camino, and I think we have one more. 626 Walnut Street. So that's just looking at what those projects will be looking like, and we would anticipate that the subsequent development in years to come will have design characteristics and a high level of design more similar to what's being shown here, rather than our massing examples that we're going to have in the future. Next slide. Okay, this is the first. We have two sites. The first site, and let me tell you about the first two. The two sites are, one is the 1100 block of El Camino, and this group is that the idea was, what if you had a number of smaller lots consolidate to create a larger development parcel? And so that's this example that we'll be talking about in a minute. This is the 1100 block of El Camino. The second scenario is, what if you have a unique site, a uniquely large site? What can be done with that? So we've looked at two very different types of development situations, and so we're going to be exploring the ideas and exploring concepts on here. So this is the 1100 block of El Camino, and this is kind of what it looks like today. So the next slide. And when we look at all the different alternatives, and we'll talk about them more, in depth in a few minutes. This is what it might be looking like if it's the entire block, and at the different heights and densities that we're going to be discussing today. Next slide.
Lisa, there's a question. Where is the large site option on El Camino?
That's 11 El Camino. It's currently a CVS site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll take it to the next slide.
Thank you. So this is the 1100 block where we're talking about. If you look at, when we look a little more closely at the examples, you're going to see that the brick building on your right, that building that's the end of our studies area. So it's really kind of the gray building to the left, pretty much all the way up to the corner. So that's what we're focusing on tonight. So this is what it looks like today. And this is what it would look like if it was built under the current zoning. So you would have the 50-foot height maximum, 4 stories. In this case, there's going to be 34 units and 50 DUs per acre. So this is what it would look like if it was built with today's rules. Next slide, please. Then, under scenario A, if the height is increased to 75 feet and 6 stories, this is what it might look like, and from a building mass perspective. Using code parking, you'd have approximately 84 units. And under reduced parking, you might receive you might get something like up to 97 units. And remember, our question is like, how do we best use land in order to achieve the maximum number of units? And we're testing those concepts with you, with that underlying premise. So this is, as I said, the scenario A was 75 feet, 6 stories. Then scenario B is 90 feet and 8 stories when it comes up.
Oops, there it is.
There you go. Thank you very much. So it's 90 feet and 8 stories. And again, you can see then the number of units that increase anywhere from 112 using the code parking to 130 with the reduced parking. So the next slide, please. In summary, here you have the three scenarios or options at this point. You have existing zoning at 50 feet, and that's kind of shown in the yellows on the left. And you'll see that there's 4 floors and 34 units. Then on scenario A, where we're raising it to 75 feet and 6 floors, you're going to see that there's kind of a range in the 80s to the 90s of the number of units that will be obtained. And then in scenario B, which is a 90-foot height limit and 8 floors, you increase up to 112 to 130 units, more or less. This is all the same site. It's all the same 0.6-acre site and the same assumptions for unit mix. And the same levels of open space and amenities. So that has all been equaled out, and we're just really looking at focusing on the height changes. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
We have a quick question. The general size of the units, are they the same size in in the different scenarios?
Yes, we made the same assumptions about unit size regardless of the scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so this is just about size and mass. We haven't made any decisions about the number of BMR units or anything like that.
No.
Is that correct? Okay.
Correct. You are correct. Does anybody else have any questions about this table or before we go on here?
Let's see. So we have another a question about why are you not considering higher density at the 50-foot height limit?
The reason why is because of the 50-foot height limit. At this point, it represents the existing zoning, and your existing zoning is 50 GUAs per acre. But I do hear your comment about what if you keep 50 feet and just up the density, and that could be something that the city may consider later on. But at this point, we'd use 50 DUs because we were trying to maintain the existing zoning.
Okay. And then just a question about the assumptions that are made. So you said the units are all the same size. Are there any other assumptions that could be helpful for people to understand?
Sure. The units are about the same size. We assumed 23% of the building total will be attributed to open space, amenities, halls, other things like that. We made some assumptions about parking. We assumed and one of our backup people who's helping us facilitate is Phoenix. So and he did this analysis. So if I'm saying something incorrect, Phoenix, jump on in. Some of the other assumptions about parking is that we assumed that there were going to be most likely a subturning, and it's not going to be surface parking. And that was pretty much from a planning perspective, we look at a pretty large scale, at a general plan perspective in particular. You look at pretty high level assumptions. You don't get down into a whole lot of details. We did look at the floors, and when we're talking about the floor heights, we assumed they're 10 feet. From each floor is about a 10-foot floor as well.
Okay, and a question, maybe someone from the city can answer that. With the square footage, so the units, we assumed a uniform size of the units. Is there a general square footage of the units that is included? And we have a question requesting that more specific information. And
we used an average. And Phoenix probably could tell you the information about what, like typically what is studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. For our analysis is we took all that together and we averaged them, I believe, to 1,000 square feet. But Phoenix, go ahead and fill us in more on units, please.
Yeah, so our average unit size, which also takes into account a 23% circulations, which basically takes into account like hallway spaces and other amenities dispersed throughout the building, comes out to 1,110 square feet. And again, this was based off of some average unit sizes with varying bedroom numbers that we collected from local developers. So, using different combinations of like studios to 3 bedrooms and coming up with different percentiles for each of them. So yeah, we made sure to like have discussions with local developers to try to make this as accurate as possible.
Okay. Any other questions about the charts or about some of the assumptions?
Yes, there's a question. Why only along El Camino? Can we put large developments in other parts of the city? So why is the focus El Camino in this meeting?
We will be talking about that later in the meeting because there are a couple of other places that we think might be suitable for this kind of thinking. So thank you for that, you know, previewing a little bit more that we'll be talking about later tonight.
Okay, and we've gotten this question about limited water factoring into the housing requirements. Can Lisa P or Lisa B, can either of you speak to that? There were some questions earlier related to the RENA and the water, and also in this exercise as well.
Thank you. Unfortunately, there's a disconnect between, a little bit of a disconnect between what's going on with housing and HCD and water. So while we know water is very critical, the state of California is also looking at that we have a severe housing shortage, not just in the Bay Area, not just on the peninsula, but throughout the state. And so that's why the state of California and through this housing is really kind of moving through with these higher level numbers and they are somewhat correlated with the number of jobs being anticipated in a community as well. So they're kind of balancing that, but there is that disconnect that they haven't connected to the fact that we do have critical water issues. So we understand your comment. But that's just the way this process works with you know, in the housing and planning part of it.
Okay, and we had a question, and someone from the city may be able to answer this, or else send the response through the chat. Do we have data on the Trestle units? That slide came up earlier, and what is the percentage of units that are filled, or are any of the units empty?
Oh, thank you, Joan. I'll jump in here. I don't have the answer to that question. That's something that the city can definitely find out, but I just don't have a percentage or any numbers that I can share with the community this evening in response to that particular question. But certainly if this is something that is really pressing to someone and they would really like to know, they can definitely email me and I will do my best to get the answer out to them.
Okay, great. And we do have a response in the chat that it's fully occupied. So I don't know the respondent, but that is some info that someone in the audience shared with us. And then just a few other things in the comments about, you know, can the city do anything to resolve this disconnect between the water issue and the housing requirements? Is this an issue that city council needs to take up with the state or ABAG?
Al, I think you turned on you opened your portal. So would you like to respond to that, please?
I did, Lisa. Thank you. And I'm Al Savay, Community Development Director with the City of San Carlos. And for local development in our area, we have a couple of different water districts, the Mid-Peninsula Water District and Cal Water, and they both actually serve different parts of the City of San Carlos. And when we do a general plan update like this, or a housing element, and we come up with new numbers, we always talk to both of those agencies and we provide them with information about how many housing units we anticipate and things like that. And we ask them to weigh in. All the development projects that we do, both commercial and residential, are reviewed by both of the water districts. And we do talk to these agencies, and they are aware of what the cities are doing on the peninsula and all the development, and they'll tell us, you know, whether or not they can provide water to our developments in the peninsula. And even though we have droughts and things like that, they've been very good about securing water from various reservoirs and other supply sources that they have. So it may not be a complete answer, but at the local level, we do have open communication with our water agencies, and they know what's happening.
Okay, thank you, Al.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go through a few more slides. All of the comments that are coming in through the chat, we're capturing on a digital whiteboard, and we'll be able to share them and preview them with the larger group. We'll continue to stop periodically and take questions. I want to get Lisa to get through a little bit more material, and I saw there's at least one hand raised. We'll stop and also take a couple of comments as well. So Lisa, why don't you take us through the next section of materials, and then we'll stop at a breaking point.
Great. So the next section of materials is we're back to talking to you. We're back to asking, what is your level of support? And this would be scenario A, the 75 feet, 6 stories. You have kind of 3 choices, essentially. Your level 1 would be, I like it. Level 2 is, I can live with it. And level 3 is, I'm not too excited about it. So Joan, would you like to describe how they?
Sure. So Jesse's going to open the polling question, and we're just seeking to get an initial pulse from you to gauge your level of interest and what's possible in terms of helping the city meet the housing numbers it needs to meet. Again, we'll take some comments in the chat, and I believe we have a couple of additional questions, and then we'll stop and take some comments as well. So let's see, we have, I have 24 people that have weighed in so far. And so 27 out of 37. And I'll share the numbers just so you have an idea of the number of people who are weighing in on the questions. Okay, 29 out of 37. So I'm just going to give it another moment or so, and we can bring this we can end this polling question and share the results. So Jesse, let's close the poll and share the results so people can see. Let's see, so 42% like it, 19% can live with it, and 39% are not too excited about it. Okay, well, thank you. That's helpful information. Okay, so Jesse, let's go. We're going to go to the next scenario B. And Lisa, why don't you review what's included in this scenario, and then the polling question is going to come up with the same 3 choices.
All right. So on scenario B, as you recall that we talked about a little bit earlier, it's looking at increasing the height to 90 feet and allowing for 8 stories. And here's the image of it is shown here. And again, the choices are, I like it, I can live with it, and I'm not too excited about it.
And Lisa, do you know how deep the building is?
Phoenix?
Yeah, let me pull up my spreadsheet real quick. So this is the 1116 ID block. Let's see, so the width of this block is 135 feet. So taking into account a 15-foot step back, it would be about 120 feet deep.
Okay, thanks. So Jesse, why don't you bring up our polling question, and people can weigh in. Again, we have a number of comments coming in through the chat. We have some concerns about parking and space in our school, and expecting people to use the bus is not realistic. We have a positive comment about scenario A, that they, let's see, comments on scenario B, not too excited for just those 2 stories, that it's jumping out of scale. And then just continued questions about the water issues related to the housing. Let's see, we got our depth question, and Can anyone answer what the general distance is from the property to the Caltrain station?
I would turn that over to city staff.
On the 1100 block to the Caltrain station, you'll have to give us a minute. We'll look it up. I don't have the exact number of feet. It's something I would have to look up.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's see. So before we go to the next lot, we have a few hands up. So you'll get a note from the Zoom host to unmute yourself. First we'll release the mute. So we have Dimitri is our first question or comment, and Dimitri will be followed by Kelly. So Dimitri, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah. So we're only talking about 2 parcels along El Camino right now. I'm assuming there are plans for more. So that's one question. But currently, we're only talking about these 2. And then, what other areas are you guys contemplating? So that's one question. And then the other thing is that the visuals of these are clearly designed for maximum, I don't know if the units themselves, the density of the units themselves, that's why I was curious about the square footage of these units. But if we're just aesthetically, these are terrible.
Okay.
So.
Right.
Good. And Lisa, why don't you take his first question and then maybe comment
Sure.
on the intent of the visualization.
Okay. The intent of the intent of the visualization. Let me start over. So we looked at 2 different types of scenarios as just examples of like, what if we have a group of lots that can be consolidated? What can happen? It's not necessarily going to be this block. No one in this block has come forward to the city to say, hey, I want to change or I want to do this. This was just, we looked at what might be a reasonable block to assume. Just like on the 11 El Camino site, we just were looking for a larger, bigger space. And so these are just examples. It's not really meant to be that specific of a space at this point.
Okay.
We are also looking at that they may be, and we'll talk about this a little later tonight, some of these ideas and concepts may go not only to other places along El Camino, but maybe other places within the city as well.
Right. So that's one big concern that I would have. What are those areas? And I'd like for, I'm hoping we can get there and then we can have some discussion, community discussion when you go to these other areas.
Sure.
And then the other comment I wanted to make publicly is it seems odd to be talking with larger cities like Oakland and Denver regarding housing when this is a significantly smaller community than those. And so the planning and the sizing and all of those things are, it just is a apples to oranges kind of comparison, and I'm a little surprised.
I'll be happy to release the full list of jurisdictions. I just didn't recall the other ones off my head. Most of them we looked at are very similar to San Carlos in size and character and nature. So I'll be happy to release that list because it was a much larger list. As I said, the ones that stuck out my heads were the ones because they did something unusual or they are getting to be really very successful. The part where we're looking at Denver wasn't Denver as a whole, it was just one small neighborhood. So it was not even Denver as a whole, it was one small neighborhood. And that neighborhood has a lot of similarity to San Carlos, except for the hills, but it had a lot of other characteristics that were similar. So that's why we looked at that. But I'll be happy to provide that to the city staff so that they can let that information be known.
Okay, so thank you, Dimitri. We have a few more folks in line, and then I'll go back to Lisa Porras to add to that response.
Oh, Joan, I was just going to respond just really briefly to the question that someone in the group had about how far is this particular case study example, the example that we're showing right here, the 1100 block of El Camino Real to the Caltrain stop. By car, it would be 3 minutes. By foot, it would be 15 minutes.
Okay, great. And there were some comments that came in through the chat, and I think just to reiterate, the visualizations are not designed. They're intended to show massing. So they don't have any of the design features or amenities that a final proposal would have. They're just intended to give you a sense of scale. So let's go to our next, the next person with their hand up is Kelly. So Kelly, whenever you're ready to speak. Okay.
There we go. Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you tonight for the presentation and the information. It's tremendously helpful. I am excited to get a little more insight into our future of San Carlos and what it's going to look like and what the housing requirements are. I do think, though, that there's a lot that we can do within the 50-foot height limit. As someone mentioned earlier, if we increase the density, we could, we can increase the number of units and get closer to that 3,200 additional unit goal, but still maintain the small village feel of San Carlos, which I know is really, really important to so many of the voters here in San Carlos. And I did have a specific question about Wheeler Plaza. And I know that none of the units in that new development of Wheeler Plaza are below market rate units. But I'm wondering, and unfortunately, I think we really, really missed an opportunity there to create below market rate availability in that particular project. But I'm wondering, are there any units that are not sold that we could convert to BMRs and sort of make up for that pretty big mistake that we made by not including any BMRs in that development?
Okay, if someone from the city could possibly handle that question.
I am going to see if Al Savay can jump in here because I think Al would have the best response to the story about Wheeler Plaza and the BMR units. Okay, thanks, Al.
So if I understand the question, and please correct me if I get it wrong, but you're saying, so there was a mistake by not providing any BMRs in the development project, and so can that be corrected in that particular project? Is that the question, or just citywide?
Well, in that particular project, yeah, because that was actually city-owned land that we sold to a developer. So like we had a really special opportunity to ensure that we had BMRs in that project. So can any of those unsold units be converted to BMRs?
They can only be converted to BMRs if the private property owner wanted to do that. So they're all condominiums, and so they're all privately owned now. But what the city did do is required payment of funds. Instead of providing the units in the development project, we required a in lieu payment of those units of $3.5 million that went toward below market rate housing. And perhaps you know that we're building an all affordable housing project at 817 Walnut behind Bianchini's. There's 24 units there. And then we're working on a second project on Cherry Street at 1232 Cherry Street, right near downtown, with 30 plus units there. So what we're doing is we took the money, and instead of creating units within that development, we're translating that into actual construction of brand new below market rate housing units in and around the downtown. So that's the strategy that the city took with regard to that project.
Okay, so I hope we've answered your question, Kelly. Now I'd like to ask our next person with their hand raised is David Tusman, and he'll be followed by Mike.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, can you remind me what the RENA allocation is for San Carlos in this upcoming cycle?
I can jump in here and answer that question. The total number of our arena is 2,735 units. And the breakdown is for very low income units is 739. And I apologize, we didn't have this on a slide. We actually had it on a slide, but I don't think it made it in this presentation. So very low is 739, low is 425 units, moderate, which again is a below market rate or affordable housing category, is at 438 units. And then above moderate or market rate is 1,133.
Gotcha. And so for trying to get my screenshots of when you're showing these two different options, how many units, like this option we're looking at is saying between 112 and 130 units, is that correct?
Yes, more or less. Again, we are, these are just for planning purposes. They are not full out designs. We've made some assumptions to get us closer. But there's still a lot more considerations that have to go into actually a design, like architectural features and a whole bunch of other things that go into this. So this is, so for the purposes of, kind of like order of magnitude, the numbers are being presented, but an actual development project may very well vary a little bit from those numbers, just because a developer will have some other intentions and designs in there too.
Understood. Yeah, and so for the order of magnitude, if we have 2,700 units of new housing that we need to enable, and this highest option gives us 130, it seems like we need 20 of these. And to me, that makes it sound like we need to not constrain ourselves to density and height for this kind of building and all other kind of buildings. Because even with this higher end option, we're going to need to build a lot. And so I think it's good to pursue the higher heights, the higher density. And I personally think this building looks great, to counter the comments saying that otherwise. I'd also like to note there's a recent article from Mountain View Voice that was highlighting that residential water consumption is often majority landscaping of lawn watering. And so the concerns of water consumption with a lot of units actually is better with higher density. Because, if we're building 2,700 units throughout the town, if they all end up being single family homes with their own lawn, that's really going to demolish our water consumption when it goes to landscaping. So density is better for water consumption, in fact. And then finally, with this being on Britton and El Camino, while it's a 15-minute walk to Caltrain, which I admit is not the most pleasant walk down El Camino, it is on a Samtrans bus stop, which then connects to El Camino. And with density of a unit of a building comes, it's a more attractive bus stop for Samtrans to prioritize that route. And I also think about the amenities of Lucky right nearby, though also not the most walkable area, even though it's pretty much just 2 or 3 blocks away, crossing that street that might not even have a crosswalk at all. So as we look at using this El Camino corridor to focus our housing, I think it's really important to improve mobility for things other than cars, like bikes and people, because it's people we want to move around, and it's people who are going to be living in these great new homes.
Okay, well, thank you for your comments and questions, David. Next, we're going to go to Mike. Mike has his hand up. Okay, let's see. I think Mike may have changed his mind. I think his hand went down. And let me just check the chat. We have a number of detailed questions about VMR. So I'm wondering if maybe would
Hello?
the city, oh,
Hello?
Mike, is that you? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, the app was not very timely with the unmute feature, so sorry I missed that. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for the work that's been done here. I was the one who submitted the question about why we didn't submit some kind of questions or consideration for exemptions or related to the number of units that are required from the state. I think that every local community would be well served to ask questions about central planning from the state. So I would just posit that, and I'd like to get that information, understand why and how that decision was made. Secondly, with respect to this kind of process, I think every process has its pros and cons, but as I look at these individual models and so forth, it's very transactional. We're seeing units one at a time, and it's kind of like, it just doesn't seem like, and maybe you're not there yet, there isn't yet a plan, and maybe this is the part of the process to sort of generate some vision for the city. But I think it's important that we understand what the vision is for the city and what it wants to be. Do we want to convert this city into Santana Row, or do we want to convert it into something else? And then lastly, I'd like to ask if with respect to cars and parking, because I do not believe that people will use public transportation as much as people estimate they will here in California. I'm from the East Coast, and in the Washington D.C. area, we had a very flat, use of buses and transportation. Federal government employees, and even high-powered attorneys often takes the bus and the subway and so forth. I found that's not the case here in California. Anyway, 2,800 units means I would guess somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500 cars in San Carlos. And so I just want to make sure that people understand the impact that would have given our rather limited transit infrastructure. We do not have the benefits of any expressways like a Lawrence Expressway or Central Expressway or anything like that you have in the South Bay.
Okay.
That's all. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for your comments, Mike. So we're gonna move forward a little bit. I did have a request to kind of refresh the scenario, so I'm going to go back a few slides. So here we were, the chart, then here we were at the 75-foot level with 6-story scenario A. And then we moved to scenario B, which was 90 feet with 8 stories.
And Joan, I was wondering if you can pause for just a moment on the table so they can see the numerical differences between what each of those, the 75 feet and the 90 feet would yield in terms of units.
And there's a question in the chat. This scenario doesn't include single family homes. It's not that style of development. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so here we are back on the chart. I'll just pause here for a moment and hopefully refresh everyone's ideas there. Okay, so we're gonna move forward here to scenario A. Again, refreshing. We've polled on both of these. So we're gonna resume the presentation. Lisa's going to talk through.
Joan, hold on before we go there. We polled on scenario B, but we didn't show the results.
Okay. Yes. So Jesse, if you could share the results. Okay. Thank you for that. So as you can see, 66% were not too excited about it. We had 17% who could live with it and 17% who liked it. So again, this is helpful feedback for the planning team. And we had 29 people weigh in on that question. Okay, so here we go. We're going to move forward.
So the next scenario that we're looking at is the larger lot scenario, like one larger kind of lot. And this lot that we're actually looking at is on 11 El Camino Real. So as you can see from the next slide, it will show you this is what the site looks like today, including the, Amazon Prime truck driving by. So it's the CVS site, and this is what it looks like today. And so then next slide. This is what that site would look like under existing zoning. And again, not architecturally designed. It's just walking and massing of what we're looking at here. 50 feet height, 4 stories with using code parking, they would have 110 units. Also under the reduced parking scenario, you'd also have 110 units because the 50 DU per acre is is being maxed out, as well as the height is being maxed out. So both of those are maxing out at this point, so that the units are not changing, even though you have a change in parking. Under the next option, which is scenario A, again, we have the 75 foot and 6 stories. Under the code parking, you would be able to achieve somewhere around 258 units. With the reduced parking, you'd achieve approximately 292. So then on the third scenario, which is scenario B, we have the 90 foot height, 8 stories. And in this case, the unit count goes up to 327 under the current zoning for parking, and then it would increase to 389 with the reduced parking. So the next table, which shows that comparison again. So on the very far left is the existing zoning, and that's kind of in the yellow color, the 4 floors, the 110 units. Scenario A is 75 foot, and that's in the middle, and that's bluish, and that looks at 6 floors and approximately 258 to 292 units. And then scenario B, which is 90 feet, excuse me, 90 feet, 8 floors, 327 units or 389, depending on your parking that you're looking at. It's a 2.2 acre site. As we talked about before, it's the same kind of unit mix, the same assumptions about unit size. Again, the 23% of the building space would be used for amenities and open space, and as well as, corridors and things like that. Does anybody have a question about this table before we start the polling?
And we'll do the same thing again. We'll take questions through the we'll start with some questions through the chat, make sure people are comfortable with the information that's been prepared. And then we'll go through the polling questions, and then we can take stop and take additional comments, and also hear what's coming in through the chat. So this question, is this poll about this particular space or anywhere in San Carlos?
This question is really about any larger lot that is fairly close, fairly close to a transit center, most likely on El Camino, maybe on a couple of the other roads, maybe on San Carlos, down closer to the downtown. So it's, again, this is an example. It's not specifically this lot. We had this lot because we modeled this lot because we have this picture of it, and you can see it. You can, it helped us develop something that you can visualize. But the whole concept as a whole is what if something happens and you're able to get a large lot? What can you do with it? So
okay.
Hope that helps a little bit about,
okay,
understanding.
So, let's see, we have another, okay. No, it sounds like that answer was satisfactory. So let's move forward, and we're going to complete the polling questions.
Okay. The first, again, like just the other, scenario A, 75 feet, 6 stories. Your responses on the polling would be, I like it, I can live with it, and I'm not too excited about it. And then using the chat feature to have any discussion that you like. And I'm sorry, Joan, if I cut you off.
No, that's perfect. And I'm just waiting for Jesse to bring up the polling question. So you should be able to weigh in on this. Okay, and we have let's see, 29 people weighing in. And there was a comment in the chat. This is not considered a citywide poll. It's considered input. So we're using the responses and the additional feedback that comes in through the chat to inform the direction that the team goes in, but it is by no means a definitive citywide vote. So let's see, so let's share the results here. So we have 48% who like it, 29% can live with it, and 23% are not too excited about it. Okay, so that's the poll for the 70 scenario A. So let's see how you feel about scenario B. So Lisa, if you could recap the features of this scenario.
Again, it's 90 feet, 8 stories, and all the other development assumptions were essentially the same as before. So the difference in this case is really the height of 90 feet and 8 stories. 1,
Okay.
like it. 2, live with it. 3, not excited.
Okay, and the polling question is open. And let's see how you feel about this example. Okay, and let's see, we have 20, 30, we have a few more people weighing in, so we're at 30 on this one. So let's share the results here. I think we have 31 weighed in on this example. So 16% like it, 23% can live with it, and 61% are not too excited about it. Okay, and we just have some comments coming in through the chat. So let's bring that poll to a close, and we can take some comments and also some raised hands. So we have a comment about, you know, this person's not excited because of view reduction, noise reflection, sun shading, and wind. There's a question, is there commercial space on the ground floor in these scenarios?
I'm going to have Phoenix answer that. As this area is mixed use, so theoretically you could have commercial below, but on modeling it, Phoenix, your response.
Yeah, so from the modeling side, we did not account for commercial. Again, this was kind of like a visualization modeling exercise. So we want to be able to write as much detailing on the ground floor to kind of get a realistic look. But again, all the numbers, the square footages, and any potential restrictions for these units that we calculated did not incorporate commercial space.
John, you're mute.
So David Crabb has raised his hand, so let's have him unmute and go ahead and speak.
Okay, you can hear me?
We can hear you, yes. What are your questions?
Okay, well, a couple of comments. One is about the, even with the 8-story scenarios, someone pointed this out earlier, you start adding them up times 8 or 9 buildings, it would be this size or, you know, something in this order. It takes that much to get to the 2,700 units. So just to kind of put things in perspective. Second is, of course, as you're doing these massing studies, and they would not be quite this a massive a building, they'd probably be broken into 2 or 3 buildings with space between, which would be better. And last, on the west side of El Camino, have you thought about increasing the depth of the higher density to 1/4 or a half mile away from El Camino, you know, further toward the west? I noticed that the map shows it gets increased along San Carlos Avenue, but then it goes along to the south or to the north, and it narrows down to just kind of a like little very narrow corridor along El Camino. Could we have something that, you know, feathers back down from 6 stories to 5 to 4 to 3 into a more single family type thing? It would give you a lot more space to add density.
So any comments on that, Lisa B or Lisa P?
I think that's good input, and we certainly can consider it as we move forward.
Okay, so do we have anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Okay, Let's see, I don't see anything coming in through, let's see. We have a comment about agreeing with Phoenix's input on expanding the area for development into the west side. We have a question, is this site already on a hill?
Lisa, do you want to answer that? I don't believe it is, but Lisa would be more
No.
familiar with that.
Yes, I can clarify that. No, this is this current CVS site, which is relatively flat. I think it does slope down a little bit as it as the site, you know, moves east towards the train tracks, but generally it's a pretty flat site in this example here that you're seeing.
Okay, great. So we have a hand. We have Brian Moriarty, who is the next person with a question or comment.
Yeah, hi there. My question is, maybe you can help me understand if I'm doing the math right. Looking at the number of additional units from these higher height requirements, it seems like we'd have to build, looking to meet the RENA requirements, we'd have to build at least 8 of those massive structures that are used in the example at 11 El Camino Real to get to the 2,700 additional units. Is that right?
Lisa, you're on mute.
That would be true if you're going to look to only rely on this type of approach. Remember, we said we can also count ADUs that are being built, any of the smaller infill lots and, you know, throughout the city. Like, let's say if there's a vacant single family unit or vacant lot that's in a single family neighborhood, all of those will count. So some of those will be coming in. You'll also get to count any of the projects that are currently in the pipeline. And so we'll be able to take out some of that. So you might not necessarily need 8 of these type of examples, but you're probably going to need to have some increased density depending on different heights or whatever, scattered throughout the community. And what we've heard from the community in the past is they really do want to kind of focus this kind of development in the areas closer to transit and closer to goods and services. At our previous, the last meeting, we talked about increasing development potential on some of the areas that are known as MUN, as well as we started talking about what if you convert some of the industrial property on the east side of San Carlos as well. And we talked about one specific block, which was Terminal. So we're just kind of throwing out ideas and trying to get the community's input on all these different ideas so that we have some kind of guidance as we go into this next process of trying to figure out that puzzle of how do we accommodate the RENA.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I mean, that helps. I mean, I do agree with the sentiment that I'd rather build more of these along El Camino than the other options. It's too bad it has to be so many though to meet the RENA requirements.
Okay, well, thanks for your question and comment, Brian. Do we have anyone else who has a comment or question that would like to speak? And so here's a question in the chat, maybe someone from the city can answer this, is will the city be looking at legalizing LAW ADU? I think they're in-law and ADU units that are not currently legal. And does that conversion count towards the RENA number?
Yes, it does. And oh, I'm sorry, was somebody else jumping in here from city staff? Okay, sorry about that. I wasn't sure if somebody else was going to answer. We do have provisions, and there is a process to legalize units that didn't go through to get a permit through the city in the past. And we definitely want to work with those folks. So if there's anyone that perhaps has one, this is a very, I should say, a very welcoming transaction, if you will, from the city. The state has made it so that made it a lot more easier to build new ADUs and also to legalize ADUs. So once we do legalize an ADU that wasn't on the books before, it can definitely count to meet the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa. Let's see. We have a question about a suggestion. Why don't you add a 90-foot building in place of the condos off of Crestview? And there's just an idea about these properties needing some redesign for fireproofing and transit. So is that an option, or can this be just an idea that we add for consideration?
There are some condominiums and multifamily housing developments spread throughout the hills. And of course, our locals know that. The zoning for these properties is set at multifamily 20 units to the acre. So if we were going to allow a large project like this, we would definitely need to change the zoning and then see if that makes a difference, to have the project turn over. But at this point, we haven't really relied on the areas in the hills, because it is a question as we look at our safety element update. Does it make sense to put a lot of the housing load into the areas that are in the hillside or in the wildland urban interface zone? So that's not something that we kind of directed our focus on at this time. And as some of you know and have been at these conversations before, we've heard you that, it's not a one size fits all. That I think there's a definite sentiment among the community that, we should look at ways to kind of spread the housing throughout. And one of the ways that we do that in the single family neighborhoods is to really promote accessory dwelling units. And we have seen an uptick in those, in the production of those. And there will be a certain amount of the RHNA that we can count on from the ADU production, but it won't obviously meet the entire need. So we are, looking at other areas in town, and El Camino made a lot of sense to us because it is the one area that, because of its proximity to transit, because of its proximity to the bus lines, and because it already has some of the highest density allowed in the city, we wanted to start, there, and which is why you're seeing the 2 case studies. And these are really provided to the community, at this workshop, to get a sense of what is your comfort level. We know that if we cap it at 50 feet and 50 dwelling units to the acre, it won't get us far enough to reach the RHNA. So if we have to go up, in certain areas, and we're going to move to another area next that Lisa Brownfield will be talking about, we want to get your sentiment. And like Joan said, this is not a decision, this is input. So we can start to see with the communities where you're feeling a little bit more comfortable about, more stories and some more density along this particular segment of our city. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Joan and Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, so there's a few more questions. One is, does the city have any program to help fund ADUs in addition to BMR units?
Not at this time. It's something that a lot of cities are looking into.
Okay.
And we will look into that, but not at this time.
Okay. And let's see, then we have another question about the Black Mountain site. So will the Black Mountain site being developed count towards the number of new units?
If it's approved, it would. It would count.
Okay, and do you know how many units that would address?
Al, if you're on the call, do we know where the VEEV development proposal is at this time in terms of total number of units proposed? The town.
I think they're at about 70, 75 units, something like that.
Okay. And let's see, then we have just a request. Whoops, I've moved his head. Can we have a workshop to legalize multifamily housing throughout the town? And just some comments to show what duplexes and triplexes and fourplexes could really look like. So there's a suggestion there. So we have a little more material to get through. So I'm going to take us through a few more slides. So Lisa B., if you're ready to help guide this. Okay, we were
Sure.
Okay, we were on our chart, and we did our level of support here. And then we did the 8 stories here. Okay, and let's see.
Here's-
So I'll take you to this slide with the city zoning map. So what does this mean?
Perfect. So as we've been talking about throughout the course of the evening, is we're kind of thinking about what other places besides El Camino, and you people here have also been talking about it as well. So this next kind of phase is talking about thinking about other areas. And in particular, at this point, we're thinking about other mixed use zones and a multifamily zone. And in particular, we're thinking about MUSC, which is kind of shown in the light lavender kind of, the light kind of pink color over in there. We're thinking about MUD, which is the lighter lavender color right in through there. And then in the area surrounding it, a little bit of that brown kind of, which is the RM59. So we were thinking about some of those areas as well. It is important to note that we're not talking about the downtown core at this point, and that transitional standards will be applied when, if any of this higher density development or higher heights are adjacent to a single family residential area. So those are just assume that that's going to happen, because it will. So our conversation is really about these 3 other areas along San Carlos, in the mixed use downtown area. Again, that's kind of that purpley color, a light purple color, and then the RM59, which is that brown color area. So next slide. So that was the same slide. We had 2, so skip again.
Okay, no, this is the one that has about your comments if adjustments were applied to this. So why don't you explain this question a little bit more to them, Lisa, and then we'll take comments through the chat. I'll read off the comments, and we can also take some verbal comments as well.
So the question is just that. What do you think about having applying some of these concepts in these other areas, in the MUD, the lavender, the light pink, and the light brown? Just in general, overall, you can, in your chats, you might want to talk about as a whole. You might want to talk about a certain area. That's all fine. We're just, again, kind of just trying to get the sense of what the community or the people who are participating in this conversation or think about this.
Okay, well, we'll give you a moment to type, and then we'll start reading off some of the comments. So there isn't a polling question here. We're seeking general comments and direction on any of the 3 colors that are mentioned, or kind of that concept as a whole. So we have a comment. One person, they are okay with it. Another commenter says this is the best place in the city to add height, as it is adjacent to existing height. Okay, wait, I'm moving through the chat and changing the slides at the same time, which I did not intend to do. Let's see. Comment, they don't want any changes in the area. Let's see. Question, what would the height limits be for the pink, lavender, and brown zones?
So I'll jump in here, and then I will ask Lisa Brownfield to confirm. But what I will say is that in these zones right now, they're all set at a 50-foot height limit. The highest density zone that we have in the city of San Carlos is actually found on San Carlos Avenue. Basically, those are the light pink parcels. The density there is set at 59 units to the acre. But in all of the other mixed use, so when you see MU, that means mixed use, all of the other mixed use zones, they're set at 50 units to the acre. So actually San Carlos Avenue is a little bit higher at 59. And so the question that we're posing to the community this evening is based upon what you just saw, the scenarios of existing at 50, a scenario A at 75 feet, and a scenario B at 90 feet. Are there any other areas in the city where housing at that particular scale could be transferred to in these other mixed use zones throughout the city? And maybe it's not something, a 6 or 8 story building you'd be interested in. Maybe it's something else, but this is what we would like to hear from you. Because as you can imagine, it takes a lot of work to kind of put in the data and do the renderings and have the computer do the simulations. So we wanted to provide examples on 2 sites, but we need to be able to think about it like, you know, what is the community's feeling for transferring some of these ideas in other places? In particular, the question is to these other mixed use zones.
Okay, so there's not a specific height limit that's being offered. It's this scenario of different heights and different densities being considered in these areas. So I have a number of comments that I'm going to read through. So I have a comment, I generally think it's okay as long as it's transitions. Another comment, no changes to this area. This tiny triangle is such a small part of town. We need to adjust the rest of the town where we restrict housing to single family only. Then we have a question, what are the plans to mitigate the traffic issues by putting high density housing near Holly Street 101? So is that something we can comment on this time? And
well, I mean, in general, traffic, I mean, you know, housing near transit is considered to be, you know, that people will take transit. And I know that there's some skepticism about that. However, if we look at projects throughout the Bay Area, there's a lot of research to support the idea that more people do generally take mass transit if they're closer to it. And that's why we call these transit-oriented areas of cities where they're within a quarter mile or a half mile of mass transit like the train or the Samtrans lines along El Camino Real and San Carlos Avenue. So generally, you'll also see most cities will have lower parking ratios in the triangle area that you see here. And so that's kind of how we deal with it. We also look for things like management of traffic within each of the developments. And we allow for some reduction of parking in apartment developments, multifamily developments, if they can show that they're providing things like transit passes or they have a gym on site or other amenities or other incentives to get people to take transit. And they have to have a very specific set of goals and standards for their development to do that, for the city to approve reduced standards and things like that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Al. I did see a hand go up. I'm going to read. I have about 20 more comments. I'm going to go through quickly, and then we'll get any questions answered there as well. So we have a comment, not in the Brown area. It makes sense. Please listen to the feedback of the existing residents. 4 to 6 stories might be okay. I don't know these, I don't think these areas should not be higher than 6 stories. I like this proposal. It helps spread out the development a little bit and gives more options. I also like that you've thought about transition plan for single family homes. The west side of El Camino Triangle could be expanded, especially along San Carlos Avenue west of El Camino. I would support all of this, lavender, light pink, and light brown. There's a question. It was mentioned that we'd adhere to transitional standards. Generally, what does that mean?
So what we mean by transitional standards is this idea that for a single family home, in San Carlos, you can build up to 2 stories and 28 feet maximum height. And in those brown areas, for instance, you see that there's an edge, right? The brown ends and the yellow begins. That's where single family and multifamily abut each other. They're right next to each other. In those areas, what we understand is that, you know, if you're going to build a taller building or a 4-story building, which is currently permitted in those brown areas, that it should step away from 2 stories up to 4 stories. It shouldn't just start right at the rear property line at 4 stories next to your single family house. but there should be sensitivity in terms of, you know, the massing of the development, so that again, it steps away from the single family and gradually rises up to 4 stories or higher as it goes away from the house to give more privacy and less impact to the single family neighborhood. So that's what we mean. It's architectural standards, it's setbacks, landscaping, and things like that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Al. So I'm going to continue to read the comments. I would support height limits higher than 50 feet along San Carlos Avenue. This area already has high enough buildings, in my opinion, for the amount of transit available. It makes sense, but the west side of Laurel and also various east side areas should be considered as well. Make sure enough parking is provided. We need more mixed use zones. We need more multifamily zones. There's a question about the G on the map, and I know that's from some part of the legend. So if someone could quickly clarify that, just what that letter is.
That means gateway. So those are gateway locations in our general plan. So key locations in our city, like walking in through the front door kind of thing.
Okay.
That's what it means.
Great. Thank you, Al. Let's see. So we have a comment, is it possible to develop a new large campus for housing at the Delta Star site on Industrial? I think the town is too small to support 100-foot buildings. The way height is being added, it is at the edges. So maybe the city should rezone some of the properties on bigger roads in the hills. Any of the problems we have now are due to experts in the past telling city leaders, yes, you can do that. I don't think we should increase the 50-foot limit in other zones. How about looking at mixed use in the industrial area, especially with the future of driverless cars and more car ride services? In the future, people will not have to necessarily be living near transit. Then just a question about the possibility of moving Caltrain and using this great location for a housing development at Laurel and San Carlos Avenue. I've seen polls that actual residents of TODs report using private vehicles daily in. Let's see, then we have a question for Al. What's your research on Transit Village and the use of transit with the current residents? That should be excellent data on the assumption of people in BMRs taking transit more often. So does the city have any kind of general data like that?
I'm not aware of any. Lisa, are you?
Not at this time. At some point in the near future, I have to look at the approval. But when this project was approved, it was required to get approval of what we call a transportation demand management plan. And that means the project has to track the number of people using transit and making sure that there's a 20% reduction in the number of trips. And so essentially after a project is in operation, after, you know, it needs to be fully operated, and then they count the data, they provide that, they report back to the city to let us know how we're doing, so we can make sure and see if they're meeting their 20% trip reduction target. And if they're not, they need to make adjustments so that the project, throughout the project's lifetime, that it continues to maintain 20% reduction of the overall trips that it generates. So it's data that we will have in the future, but we don't have as of yet because it's a relatively new project.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. I'm going to continue with some of the comments. And there is a hand raised, Mike, we will be getting to you, so please be patient. Just a few more comments I'll be reading. I think the high buildings should be allowed in the east side industrial area where they are still close to transit and grocery shopping. We have such poor transit in the city that it should not be a consideration in building throughout the city. And all the housing near transit doesn't address the last mile, which the city has left to Samtrans. There should also be sensitivity to sunlight. And then just a question, if maybe someone from the city could answer this through the chat. How many people are on the San Carlos affordable housing waiting list?
I can, Joan, I can answer the waiting list question. I think we have about 3,000 people on the BMR waiting list at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you, Al. We have a comment. City Hall should be moved for high density housing along with the Samtrans building. Please obtain the data from the Transit Village. That's very critical data. Can we consider building on little used area of Central School? And then hasn't the Transit Village been deemed a failure so far, given the inability to find tenants, long-term vacancy, etc.? It's not the gateway that was sold to the city.
Joan, I'd like to answer that question. My understanding and knowledge is that it's at least 90% rented at this time, and it rented up very, very quickly. And I mean, within the first, 6 months to a year, I think it was 75, 80% leased. And it may be someone said that it was 100% leased up. And I know that we've had city employees living there, and they have reported, enjoying living there too. So I'm not sure that that really bears out in terms of the percentage of units that have been rented and that kind of thing.
Okay, thanks, Al. There was Mike had his hand up. It's since gone away. So Mike, if you want to speak again, please, there's your hand again. Okay, we're going to unmute you. And if you would like to go ahead and either ask your comment, make a comment, question.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Just brief. I took my hand down because you mentioned it was up there for a long time. I didn't want to distract. Sorry to be a nuisance. My question was, my request would be that, is it possible for us to get, let's just say, credible information about the impact for, traffic of, any and all of these plans as we walk, and the associated mitigation plans? Because, I know that the gentleman earlier, who probably knows more than I do about development, states that, there is not, that these transit things are successful because, people live near transit, there aren't as many cars, there's, mitigate the traffic impact. But my anecdotal evidence myself, and a lot of people I talk to, is that that's just not the case. I think it's been very successful in communities like Walnut Creek, San Ramon, Dublin, East Bay, probably Daly City, where BART, is a pretty robust platform. Unfortunately, Caltrain, well, I like it. I would love to take it, but for me to get to my job in San Francisco would take 2 hours by public transit. Unfortunately, it would cost me cost more, or about the same as, driving and parking. So anyway, what I was going back to the request was, is it normal for, traffic impact and traffic mitigation plans to be developed in parallel with these projects? And if not, could we consider it?
Okay. I'll have someone from the city answer that question. And then they're following Mike, there's another hand as well.
Lisa, did you want to talk about CEQA associated with that housing element? And
Lisa Brownfield?
Sure.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, you can go ahead, Lisa.
I think she's asking you. I was
going to say you go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So the housing element, as you know, this project is more than just the housing element. It's also the safety element. We're updating the safety element, and we may be looking at changing the zoning. So when we're looking at that whole kind of package, we will be doing a CEQA analysis. In this case, an EIR, and that EIR will look at all the different normal impacts. Dealing, the infrastructure, schools, as well as environmental impacts like biology and as well as things like aesthetics and population housing. So all of that, we're going to be looking at all of that throughout the in the CEQA process, which will be at the end of the project. So I would anticipate that we're probably going to have a scoping meeting when the EIR is about ready to kick off. So that would be another public meeting for you to provide your input about specific things you would like the environmental review analysis to look at as well.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Let's see, I'm going to read a few more comments. Then we'll go to, we have two more people with hands raised. So we have a comment to extend density options west of Walnut Street to increase areas open to higher density, similar to the new affordable housing development at Biachini's. Then we have a question about the school district and the school district's ability to support the new students that might come with these new units. So if someone from the city could respond to that.
I guess there's a couple of, and as noted by Lisa, we'll be taking a closer look at, how many students would be anticipated with the 2,700 new housing units, that kind of thing. And our school district receives money from the state for the students that come to the city of San Carlos. So in some way, the district benefits from students. If the district is impacted, there's issues there, of course. What we've seen, oddly enough, is I believe in, and we'll confirm this, but in the last few years, there's been less elementary school students and middle school students in our community. And this has led to maybe some financial impacts to our local school district. You may have heard about that. So that's counterintuitive to what we thought a number of years ago. Secondly, each housing development has to pay a fee when they come to the city of San Carlos. So the developer pays a school fee, an impact fee to the school district. And the state says that cities cannot say no to housing developments that pay this fee. Once the fee is paid and it's part of the development project, the city cannot legally say no to housing development.
Okay, thanks, Al. So I'm looking at the clock here. We have about 7 minutes left between now and 8 o'clock. So I have two more hands raised, Dimitri, followed by Jennifer. We will have formal public comment. I know many of you have already spoken so far, but we want to make sure that we have reserved time for that. So I'm just going to ask people to keep their questions and comments brief. So Dimitri, you're the next person. So you should be able to speak.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so there were some comments about the potential for housing on the east side, and I think that they're next to the Alexandria campus, the large campus that they're proposing. I think there are opportunities on Britton Avenue as well as commercial to have some housing that could serve the needs of the people who would be working in these biotech industries. And then that would cut out all sorts of commuting because people could just walk to their employers and walk to downtown. So I think that there's some benefit there, but it has to be done in a thoughtful manner to not overly impact and or existentially threaten our existing community on the east side.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dimitri. And next we have Jennifer. So when Jennifer, you should be able to unmute and speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Yeah, please go ahead. We can hear you.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to echo, I think, what Mike was saying about thinking like for comprehensive planning, because I've attended a couple of these meetings, and then I think that there's some other bike stuff. I don't really know what that is. And then I've attended the East Side Innovation meetings, and I feel like there's a lot of many developments planned that will bring in a lot of people and a lot of traffic to the city and change it quite substantially. So I would love to see comprehensive planning for the whole city, because even in the East Side Innovation District, it's like, only look at this square, and right now we're only looking at this square, but this town is really small, and I think that any change that's made to even a little triangle or a little square or a little rectangle of the city will impact the entire city. So really trying to plan comprehensively for parking, traffic, safety, and trying to plan ahead to mitigate the challenges that will occur. I'd love to see that.
Okay, great. So we have some agreement. We have someone who likes the idea of including housing in major developments like Alexandria. We have a comment about lackluster transit and a question about the large Caltrain electrification project. Is there information about efforts to improve transit in the area? And then we also have a comment about someone who rents in the light brown area that was discussed, and comments that during construction there were impacts to parking, traffic, noise, vibration. And so their comment ends with a plea to encourage speedier construction and minimize impacts to residents who must ride out these transitions living and driving down the block. So I'm going to, let's see, go to our next slide. So this was kind of our final comments and questions. I think we've gotten most of those. So let's go to public comment. So if there's anyone who wants to make a formal public comment, the information is being received in the same way. We weren't sure how large the group was, so we did want to make sure that we had a designated public comment period. If you would like to make public comment, you get 2 minutes, and just submit your name through the chat and use raise hands. So we'll just pause for a moment to see if anyone wants to make public comment. Okay, we have a hand up from Kelly, and Jesse's going to set the timer, and you should be able to speak. Whoops. And let's see. Let's see. Okay, let's make sure that.
You're asking me to unmute, but I'm Jennifer, so maybe.
Oh, okay. So you hold on, and we'll have Kelly speak. She was hands up first.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't want to speak. I'm just letting you know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Kelly?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for the comprehensive presentation this evening. I think it's really important, based on the survey results that you saw tonight, that we really try and balance the needs for additional low-income housing with our city, along with the desire of the vast majority of voters in this city to maintain the small village feel of San Carlos. So I think as much as possible, we should try and remain in the current 50 feet limit, or 59 feet on El Camino, get creative with developing the east side and more mixed use developments in that region of San Carlos. And I think that we should increase the density for projects, so that we can meet the housing requirements for 2040. So again, I really do think that the vast majority of voters, if you put this out to a vote, would really be opposed to the massive overdevelopment that was proposed in some of the concepts tonight. I think everyone in this community does support adding additional BMRs, because we absolutely want to have places for everyone to live. But I think we really, really need to balance that with maintaining the San Carlos village feel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Our next commenter is Scott Marsters, and Jennifer, your hand's up, so you'll be after Scott. So Jesse's going to reset the timer, and Scott, you should be able to speak.
Thank you. So my comment, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
So my comment with all of this development, whether it be the housing, whether it be all the development that is occurring on the east side, is that these developments must mitigate the impacts that they're having on the community. Okay, and the huge one, which is the elephant in the room, is traffic. And so when you look at 3,000 new housing units, which could account for as much as 4,000 or 5,000 more vehicles, and you look at all the developments that are occurring on the east side, we're talking another 8,000 to 10,000 vehicles. You're looking at more vehicles coming in the next couple of years than we already have coming in and out of San Carlos on a daily basis. And the huge impact of that is going to have to be addressed somehow. And so there are other impacts from all of these projects too, but the big elephant in the room is the traffic. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And we don't have another hand raised after Scott. So any other comments? Let's see, Dimitri and Mike have their hands raised. So we have 2 more commenters. So Jesse's going to reset the clock, and Dimitri, you'll be able to start in just a moment there. Okay, Dimitri, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. Yeah, so thanks for the for this meeting. I think it's very helpful. I agree with Scott, regarding the transportation demands. It's something that we really need to look at. But I also feel that the city continues to approach a lot of this stuff in a too much of a piecemeal fashion, and we really need to have a more holistic view. There was a commenter earlier who talked about that, because development anywhere is gonna have significant impacts. So I think the these East Side visioning meetings are a good start in that direction. I'm hoping that there will be actually outcome that is and the feedback is actually going to be listened to. And I have concern about some already baked in ideas about what should happen without really having the community input taken into full consideration, because I've seen that happen a bit too much in the past. So I'm hoping that we can actually have a real dialogue and work together to really clean things up. So that's basically all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Dimitri. And we have another hand. Mike, if you'd like to make a comment, Jesse will reset the clock, and there it is. It's ready to go. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you all for your patience. I know I've occupied a little bit more bandwidth than most tonight, but I want to say thank you to the staff for putting this together. Just want to reiterate several comments, but also make another one, is that I really think if this has to happen, then we really need to focus on the below market aspects of this to help be at least somewhat of a haven for essential workers, public safety, essential personnel that cannot afford these market rates, which, as we all know, have gotten pretty astronomical. And we need higher percentages than the 10% in the transit village, which was a pittance, really, considering the opportunity there, especially being right on top of transit. Teachers come to mind, for example. We're having a hard time recruiting teachers in San Carlos and across, obviously, the peninsula right now. And just as part of the public comment piece, I just want to reiterate the traffic element and request that be integrated into this plan. And secondly, that we, the person spoke, I spoke earlier and someone else spoke earlier about a holistic plan. Looking at these developments and parcels as in piecemeal is really challenging in terms of understanding what's happening and what will happen holistically. And lastly, I think we just have to ask ourselves, and the city council has to ask ourselves, who are we, San Carlos? What do we want to be? Do we want to have development like Santana Row and large scale block type stuff? How are we going to balance what San Carlos is what the change, that will naturally obviously have to occur, and how do we manage that well instead of letting it be driven by developers and the state.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Mike. I don't see any more hands, so we're going to close the public comment period, and we just have just a few more slides that Lisa from the city is going to we'll do a quick walkthrough. I think I have the two Lisas up next. A quick review of the timeline, and then our next steps. And Lisa B, you're on mute.
Thank you. So as you can see in the first square on the left, we're still in summer spring of 2021. We're talking about identifying housing setting criteria, and you clearly participated in that. From here, we're going to be looking at other potential land use changes and citing the housing sites based on conversations like tonight. And then as we go into winter, we're going to actually be drafting the elements and zoning amendments. In the end, you'll see the very bottom right-hand square, we talk about being the summer or fall of 2022 as being in the Planning Commission and the City Council consideration. So those are our targets, and we're moving through at a pretty good clip. Next slide. So the next, we've already talked a bit about this a little bit. So what our next steps is, one is we're going to be refining the feedback from what we heard today as well as what we've heard previously. We're going to determine if the solutions that we're talking about are feasible from a development standpoint, as well as is it suitable to fit the state's criteria. Then we're going to be looking at applying the modifications and determining if the target number that we've laid out can be met. And then if that's the case, then we'll be taking the next steps. So we're actually looking at refining the development regulations or the zoning. And of course, then we're going to be our next community engagement will most likely be in the fall, where we're holding some study sessions with the Planning Commission and the City Council. And that's where we're really going to be summarizing what we've learned so far, as well as how we've applied it and kind of the direction that we'll be going in. So that's what's happening in the very near term of the next few months.
Okay. And let's see. So, whoops. So with that, we have any final remarks from the panelists? I do want to take a moment to, we have been capturing all of your comments. So everything that has come in through the chat, we have a team that has been taking notes throughout. So obviously, this is just to give you an idea of the volume of feedback that we have received, and to let you know that we have captured it and organized it, and it will be used as input. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the city for some final closing remarks.
Thank you, Joan, and I'll make it brief. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who participated in tonight's workshop. Like Joan said, all of this information that we received will be taken as input as we continue to refine the solutions that will help us, be able to provide and plan for more housing as our city continues to grow, and recognizing that, what we're doing here is we're really trying to make sure that the housing is available to everyone of all incomes, and that we're being a very inclusive city. So your input tonight will really help us to refine and shape the solutions that go forward. And just a little reminder, if you haven't signed up to get emails from us, please do visit sancarlos2040.org. That way, as we move ahead to any meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council, study sessions that we have in the future, that you are invited and that you can come and speak during that time to let your electeds know your input and your support for us going forward. So with that, thank you once again for joining us, and have a great night. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. We are adjourned. Good night.